Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today, we're diving deep into the facts, fears surrounding menopause and hormone replacement therapy. And we're going to hold nothing back today. So, if you've ever felt paralyzed by the misinformation from the 2000s, or you just simply need an authoritative voice to cut through the stigma, then this episode is essential for you. So, our guest is one of the most powerful and knowledgeable advocates in the space. Dr. Noor is a menopause specialist and MD, and the founder of Lifestyles by Noor, a physician who firmly believes in evidence over fear. If you have seen her Instagram account, it's just education and information, and it's wonderful. And I found her there on Instagram, and I'm so excited to share this amazing person with you. So, our conversation is medical truths today. It's about self-advocacy and feeling fully empowered in your health journey. We're going to talk about HRT, low iron, breast cancer, and HRT. Can I start HRT if I'm over 70? And then we'll also get into the DEXA scan. So let's dive right in. Welcome, Dr. Noor.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Fantastic. So I think for the listeners, let's hear a little bit about you. What got you to where you are now, and tell us about the people that you're helping.
Yeah. So my name is Dr. Noor Al-Humaidhi. I am a family physician. I'm actually originally from Kuwait in the Middle East. I went to medical school in Dublin, Ireland. So I lived there for 7 years and then moved to London. My husband is from Northern Ireland, but was living in London at the time. And that's where I started my career. So I did my training in general practice in the UK with the National Health Service. Had my kids there. We got married there. And about coming up on 9 years ago, which is hard to believe, we moved to the US for a variety of reasons, and I relaunched my career in family medicine, which is no easy task when you haven't done a residency in the US. But I was in kind of a, I was able to relaunch my career. I was in a family medical practice, very kind of conventional, if you like. And I, in my late phase, kind of around COVID, started to have what I now know were perimenopausal symptoms. I didn't know how to help myself. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And that sent me on this deep dive into perimenopause and menopause. And the more I learned, the more I realized, my goodness, I don't know anything about this. And also, oh my goodness, I've treated people so badly. I had no idea. And I was just ashamed at what the things I had said to people. So in my kind of journey for my own self healing, I learned everything that I could. And the more I learned, the more I realized that this is just not accessible to most women, and not just the treatment, but the approach and the honesty and the shared decision making that goes into having this relationship with somebody and taking care of somebody like this, that I decided this is what I needed to be doing and needed to. So I launched Lifestyles by Noor kind of on a way in a prayer. And it's just gone from strength to strength. And my social media presence has gone from strength to strength. All of it rather unplanned, but wonderful nonetheless.
Yeah, incredible. I love to hear the story about how you felt almost ashamed about what you told other people. It's just so wonderful that you can do this now, right? I think there's so many doctors out there that may never take the opportunity to say, you know what, I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna change the narrative. I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna be better. I have information, and I'm gonna do different things with my patients or tell them different things. So
And
that's
there's a
amazing.
humility that comes with that. You
Yeah.
have to accept,
Yeah.
and that's hard when you've
Yeah.
always been the top of your class and the smartest person in the room. And, everybody looks to kind of hold up your hands and say, hang on a minute, I don't know anything about this. It takes a level of humility and self-reflection to be able to do that. And some people struggle with that. Some people struggle to realize that they were wrong.
Yeah, and I think those tapes that keep playing, they strong. Yeah, that level of humility would be great. And I think the narrative is changing. I feel like the stuff is starting to turn. And so with that, can we talk about this one more time, doctor, please? The WHI trials. I still have people saying, I'm so scared. I don't know if I should be taking HRT. Can we just clarify this today? And just, I think, make it easy in a way that it's like, what happened? What were these trials? And what proceeded from that?
Yeah. So really, up until the late 90s, it was very well established in the medical community and the literature that HRT had benefit for women, had benefit for their bones, for their metabolic health, for their cardiovascular health, and for their genitourinary system. It was, we estimate, somewhere in the region of at least 40% of postmenopausal women were on hormone therapy. And the NIH, National Institute of Health, decided in the late 90s to do a study, particularly looking at the outcome of cardiovascular disease and hormone therapy. So the question that they pose, what we call a hypothesis. So anytime you do a study, whether it's using in patients or, on a bench with pipettes, is you ask a hypothesis. So the hypothesis was, does hormone therapy decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease? That's what they were looking at specifically. They recruited 16,000 women in two groups. One of the groups had their uterus and the other group did not. So they had had a hysterectomy. The reason that this is relevant is because when you treat a woman with a uterus with estrogen, her uterus thinks you're preparing it for a pregnancy. So that lining of the uterus, what we describe as the endometrial lining, will thicken. And that can cause things like unscheduled bleeding. It can cause polyps. It can cause all sorts of things that we don't want. And ultimately can increase your risk of endometrial cancer, which we don't want. So in a woman that has a uterus, if you give her estrogen, you must additionally give her progesterone. In a woman that does not have a uterus, technically you can give her estrogen unopposed, so without the progesterone. Now, we're not going to have this conversation today, but that's something I treat women that have had a hysterectomy with progesterone because they need it. And we can talk about the kind of functions of those hormones in our body. But for the purpose of the WHI, the Women's Health Initiative, which was the name of the study, they had two groups. One of the groups received estrogen and progesterone, and the second group received estrogen alone. It's really important to note what they received. So as an estrogen, they received Premarin, which is conjugated equine estrogen. So it's estrogen derived from the urine of pregnant mares. It's something that was still on the market, actually inaccessible, not very commonly used. I don't use it very often at all. So they use conjugated equine estrogen orally as a tablet. Then for the progesterone, again, they didn't use the progesterone like we have in our body. They used a progestin, which is a progesterone-like molecule that has that limiting effect on the uterine lining that decreases our risk of a pregnancy. So it's a contraception. And what they used was something called medroxyprogesterone acetate. That's something we still occasionally use if somebody's having very, very, very heavy periods and we're trying to kind of lighten up their periods. Not very commonly used. So the women that had a uterus received Premarin orally and medroxyprogesterone acetate, and the women that did not have a uterus, they received Premarin alone. They recruited a control group, and away they went on the study. In 2002, they called a press conference in front of the world's media in Washington, D.C., and they said the words, "Hormone therapy causes breast cancer." Now, the first thing to note is that was the outcome that they were measuring in the study, and we can touch on that in a minute. But what they said was that hormone therapy increases the risk of breast cancer. What they showed 9 days later, the actual study was published in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. What the data show is the following. In the group that had their uterus, in the group that received hormone and the control group that did not receive hormone, their background risk of breast cancer was 4 in 1,000. Now, right off the bat, that's very low. Current breast cancer risk in most women is about 1 in 8, but it was 4 in 1,000. In the group of women that received hormone, their risk appeared to increase by 1 in 1,000, so to 5 in 1,000. Now, that finding was not statistically significant. Now, anytime you do a study, again, whether it's in patients or on a bench with pipettes, you have to prove from statistical analysis that this couldn't have just happened by chance. And we call that significant. Is the finding significant? So This was not significant. So they did not prove that the hormone therapy increased that risk of breast cancer by 1 in 1,000, which is also very low. What they also show in the data is that in the group that did not receive progesterone, so in the group that did not have a uterus, so they received oral Premarin alone, their risk of breast cancer went down by 23%. And that finding has held over time. To this day, that group still carries a decreased risk of breast cancer. So hormone therapy does not cause breast cancer. It is not there in the data. And huge meta-analyses have been done going forward.
Yeah.
And it is not in the data.
Yeah.
Hormone therapy does not cause breast cancer. But when you stand in Washington, D.C., in front of the world's media, and they caused a media circus. It was on the cover of newspapers. It was on the cover of magazines. It was on the morning shows. Everybody was saying hormone therapy kills people.
You got a bunch of women that are actually feeling good, and now, sorry, no more. I remember my mom actually starting HRT and then this massive scare. She had heart disease, so that was like the big thing. Of just, we can't be doing this anymore. So sad that so many people have been cut out of this. So there is very exciting news right now, though. So for the first time in history, let's talk about that, about the
Yep.
black box warning.
So out of the WHI, the FDA rushed through in a very clunky way without following appropriate methods of how a black box warning is applied to a drug. They applied a black box warning to all estrogen-containing HRT products. And I don't know if you've read the black box. I should have brought it up here with me so I could read it
I
to you.
haven't, because
It
I'm just such
basically
a
says
believer.
that this product increases your risk of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, dementia, heart disease, stroke. It's scary. And this was on every estrogen product, including low-dose vaginal products. So I've had times, in my career, in the past, that I've prescribed a vaginal product to a patient and they haven't used it. They brought it back and said, I read the black box and I'm not going to use it. So what we've seen this week or last week is that the FDA removed the black box warning from estrogen-containing HRT products, which is huge. So they've undone incredible damage. And this has fortunately caused a lot of again, menopause is back on all the morning shows and the front page of all the newspapers saying that they got it wrong. And we need to rethink this. Now, I have seen some, online influencers and various articles talking about how, they overstated the benefits of when removing the FDA black box warning. And, oh my goodness, this is terrible. Women are now going to want to be on estrogen. Yeah, they are. And they deserve to. First of all, I find that so patronizing. We prescribe medication as doctors all day, every day. There are plenty of medications out there that increase your cancer risk that do not have a black box warning. There are plenty of medications that have fatal potential side effects that do not carry a black box warning. And we have to make those decisions to prescribe those medications every single day that we have been a practicing doctor. So to somehow tell me that because the FDA removed the black box warning, I'm going to put it in the water? It is demeaning of my brain power. It's patronizing, and it treats women like children as far as I'm concerned. It's still a prescription product. You can't buy it over the counter, which I think vaginal products should be available over the counter. That's another conversation. But it's just so patronizing and upsetting. Oh, we've removed the black box warning. Oh my goodness, all women are going to want it now. Yeah, and they should.
Yeah, I'm excited about what's happening, and I think the more we talk about it, I think there was a thing about, I think it's 8 billion women, and you spoke about 40% of women were having a result on the WHI, and then probably people went off it, and because of all of this massive scare, so few women are using HRT. And the other thing I was thinking about was, which I didn't really know, is taking birth control is also a form of hormone therapy, but it's massive doses, and women happily pop birth control pills when it's intense amounts of hormones, which also have side effects, possibly. Am I correct?
You are very correct. So just to clarify, when you say birth control, I think you mean the combined oral contraceptive pill.
Correct.
So it's
Thank
a combination of ethinyl estradiol and a form of progestin, like we discussed. And the purpose of birth control is exactly that, to control your risk of an unplanned pregnancy. So it's a contraception. And its job is to essentially turn off your own endogenous hormone production. So you are not making eggs, ovulating eggs, thickening your endometrial lining, all of which would happen throughout a normal menstrual cycle. A menstrual cycle sees these beautiful rises and falls of your own endogenous estrogen production. When you're on birth control, it's a flat line of your own production. You're completely suppressed. And essentially, the hormones in the birth control are taking over. So you have ethinyl estradiol, which is a estradiol-like, so it's not exactly like the estradiol we make in our body. And it has a very, very, very huge affinity for the estrogen receptors in our body. So it's very potent compared to the 17 beta estradiol that we would prescribe in HRT. So it's higher dose, it's higher potency, and it has the ability to actually cut your entire production of estradiol in your body. And
Wow.
unfortunately, for a lot of people, that can present with side effects. If you're not making your own hormones, that's why a lot of women maybe have mood disturbance, low libido. Women will present with vaginal symptoms and say, I have BV all the time. I have yeast infections all the time. I have recurrent UTIs. I often challenge people, how many 20-something-year-olds on birth control do you know that are always having UTIs? Guess what? That's not UTI. That's menopause in their vagina because they're on birth control.
It's incredible. My daughter is like 23 years old, talks about friends of hers. It's just commonplace, and that is so sad. So I'm so glad that we brought this up today. Can't wait to share this podcast. I want to talk about something else now, just pivoting completely. On your Instagram, I want to share this with people. I want to talk about a patient of yours who was prescribed HRT. She had a history of breast cancer and how the patient was subsequently shamed. Can you walk us through that story?
This happens all the time. I have another story I can share with you that happened just very
Mm.
recently. So I see patients that often have been denied HRT in other settings. Maybe they have a history of a clotting disorder or a personal history of a clot or a history of a stroke or a cardiac disease. But this particular person had a family history, very strong family history of breast cancer. And she was followed by the high risk breast cancer center. So when you have over a certain amount of risk, or maybe you're BRCA positive, often you'll be referred to the high-risk breast cancer center where you'll have additional screening. So they'll keep a much closer eye on the situation whether it's mammograms, MRIs, ultrasounds, examinations. So she had come to me. She is considered high risk for breast cancer, never had breast cancer herself, high risk for breast cancer because of her family history, but she wanted to go on HRT because her symptoms were unmanageable. And so we had a conversation like we just had now about what the data actually shows us about HRT and breast cancer. And she decided that she wanted to take HRT. It was going to help her feel better, and she wanted to take it. So I started her on HRT. Significant improvement in her symptoms, better. And she was scheduled for her follow-up in the high-risk breast cancer center, and away she went for her appointment. And she was treated horribly during that appointment. She was shamed. She was told, do you know that what you're doing is going to increase your risk of breast cancer? Your breast cancer risk is already high. Are you sure you want to do this? Who is this doctor that's prescribing this for you? Just a horrible, antagonistic appointment. And then subsequently called me, obviously distressed and upset, because she's been given contradictory information.
Yeah.
It's awful.
So then what happened from there? So you have to retell her the whole story, and eventually she gets onto the product, right?
So
Again, I wish she stays on it.
we had a whole conversation again about the data. It's hard to have this conversation because you're essentially contradicting other
Yeah.
doctors. And
Yeah.
I don't want to belittle other doctors. That's not what I do. But you have to contradict other people in their lives that
Yeah.
they have seen as people with authoritative voices. And that's a hard thing to convince somebody to do, to essentially ignore what somebody's saying to them. So you tread a very, very, very difficult line. And this is the same when people, I have patients that I treat that have had breast cancer, and we have a conversation around their risk of recurrence. There's always risk of recurrence. And some of them decide to proceed and some of them decide not to proceed. And of those that decide to proceed, it's often a bit of a fight with their oncology team. They're not happy
Understood.
about it. But at the end of the day, the majority of women with a diagnosis of breast cancer, they're not going to die of their breast cancer. They're going to die of heart disease.
Yeah.
They're going to die of a fracture.
Yeah. I think you mentioned it was such a great line that women are not just breasts.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like looking at this thing holistically. These women are struggling so much with their menopausal symptoms. And if you can have relief and quality of life, I think that's so important.
I mean, it's to the point people come in and talk to me sometimes and I just cry. Their marriages are breaking down. Their marriages are ruined because they can't have sex because they have no libido.
Yeah.
They've ruined their relationship with their kids because
Yeah.
they're so anxious and having obsessive intrusive thoughts. I mean, we're not talking about, oh, I have a hot flash. We're talking about things that, like, people's lives are ruined
Yeah.
if you don't do something
Yeah.
to help them
Yeah.
with their menopausal symptoms. And who cares if they survived their breast cancer if their lives are ruined?
Get it. I get it. Completely understood. I want to just ask one more question around HRT. Who are the candidates that should be getting HRT? So I know for myself and, talking to so many different doctors, it's like symptoms or no symptoms. We're going to age. Women are living longer as well. That's another subject entirely. But if you're in your 40s, I mean, my doctor had one symptom and she's like, let's do it. Let's get started. And I'm so glad I have somebody like that. But are there specific criteria? Women are going to wake up and going, oh, I have symptoms. Do you need to specifically have symptoms to start HRT?
So I'm going to answer this in stages. So the
Okay.
first point to make is that all women are candidates for HRT. All women deserve a conversation. And if they decide that they're candidates, no matter what their history, if they decide after a conversation that that's what they want, then they are a candidate for HRT. The second part of your question is, when do you start HRT, right? So I like to break this into two groups, two parts. The first one is symptoms. So if you have symptoms, and those symptoms can be vast and varied. I have people come and see me and their major symptom is vertigo, tinnitus, burning mouth syndrome, GI symptoms, chest pain, shortness of breath, migraines, visual disturbance. There are so many symptoms of menopause, far beyond what people think are symptoms of menopause, not to mention the mental health, the anxiety, etc. So if you're having symptoms that we think could be perimenopause and menopause, then that's one reason to treat. The second one is prevention. So we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that being on HRT decreases your risk of an osteoporotic fracture by at least 30%. I think the number's higher, but at least 30%. 1 in 2 women will have an osteoporotic fracture in her lifetime. That means that all women are going to lose bone density. That means that for the preventative benefit, all women are at risk of osteoporosis and fracture. Therefore, all women are candidates for the preventative benefits of HRT. Now, we're putting aside the cardiovascular risk, and people will love to argue about this, but we know the data from the WHI that if you initiate hormone therapy within 10 years of menopause, you decrease a woman's risk of all-cause mortality by 50%. You decrease a woman's risk of cardiovascular disease by at least 30%. The data is there. You can look it up. The tables are there. It's very, very clearly stated. So from what people are accepting, everybody's a candidate for prevention because all of us are at risk of osteoporosis, but there's also these other preventative benefits. So there's 2 reasons to start HRT. You might not have symptoms, but if your mother, for example, had osteoporosis, or maybe your bone density is abnormal and you have osteopenia, or maybe you have a very strong family history of cardiovascular disease or type 2 diabetes, you might choose, I know from this data that being on this medication or this hormone can decrease my risk of developing chronic disease. Therefore, I want to pull that trigger now and make that change now. And what we also know is that the earlier you intervene, the better. So actually intervening in perimenopause has better outcomes for a
Yeah.
lot of these endpoints than even
Yeah.
if you intervened within 10 years of menopause.
Okay. So I have a question for you. One of my senior yogis asked me this question. I'm just going to find it so I get it right here. Let me just see. To know, she knew that I was going to be speaking to you and I was telling them how wonderful you are in my yoga class. She says, what do you do with a 70-year-old woman, 70, who is not on estrogen, has osteoporosis, problems sleeping, difficulty losing weight?
I give her HRT. There's this business of it being too late for HRT is a myth. And let's talk about that for a minute. So that comes from this idea of, again, from the WHI, of what they call the 10-year window.
Mm.
One of the findings from the WHI was that when you intervene with HRT within 10 years of menopause, you decrease a woman's risk of cardiovascular disease by at least 30%. When you intervene later, you might increase her risk of a heart attack and stroke. And the numbers are very small. Let's dissect that. In the WHI, they gave women oral Premarin, oral estrogen. Now, we all know that oral estrogen, like in birth control, increases your clot risk. So if your clot risk was 1 to 2 in 1,000, it goes to somewhere like 6 to 7 in 1,000, maybe higher. So oral estrogen increases our clot risk. This is a statement of fact. So we know from the WHI that women start to develop cardiovascular disease after they lose estrogen. And we think the point at which a lot of them might have established cardiovascular disease is around 10 years. In the WHI, they recruited, the average age of women in the study was around 64. There were a lot of women that were past that 10-year window. Yeah, many women passed that 10-year window. Many women had not had any of their hormones for 20 years. So some of them had developed heart disease. Can we agree on that statement? And then they gave them oral Premarin, oral estrogen, so some of them clotted. I'm not that surprised by that finding.
Yeah, makes sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
We don't use oral Premarin. We use transdermal estradiol. Transdermal estradiol does not carry a clot risk. So if your clot risk is 1 to 2 in 1,000 and I slap an estrogen patch on you, your clot risk remains 1 to 2 in 1,000. So the cardiovascular risk question becomes a moot point. Maybe I won't be able to walk back the cardiovascular changes that have happened because you've been without your hormones for all of those years.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're not going to have benefit for your bones and for your brain and for your sleep and for your mood and for your vagina.
And if we talk about women and humans living longer, I mean, one of the oldest yogis that comes to yoga, she turns 84 this year. Push-ups, planks, women, people, humans, science, medicine is incredible. And so if we talk about being 70 and you've got another 20 years on you, 15 years, if you think about your total lifespan, that's a long time.
It's a
And
long
so to make those years livable and easier and, improve your lifestyle, absolutely incredible.
100%.
Can we just quickly talk about another thing to do with, so those risks is if we are not taking that kind of oral progesterone, like I take a micronized oral progesterone, that's
Yep.
very different, right?
So oral micronized progesterone is body identical or
Okay,
bioidentical.
got
So
you.
it's the
Good.
same progesterone that we make in our body. It's a larger molecule than the estradiol, so we don't absorb it very well through our skin. And that's why it's
Understood.
dosed orally.
Got it. Okay. So that makes sense. Another story, which I think people might relate to and really, really, really important because we're always like, oh, it's menopause. Oh, it's menopause. And actually, oh my gosh, you have low iron, which probably comes as a result of heavy bleeding from menopause. But we'll get into that. You spoke about an incident on social media about a patient who nearly died because of low iron levels. What actually happened there?
So lovely, lovely woman. So she was in her 40s and she was having heavy periods. But this is something that we can circle back to this, that nobody really asks about heavy periods. And even if they do, they kind of belittle people's experience. There's a very hilarious comedian. I don't know if you follow her, Julia. I can't remember her last name, but she's so funny. She does these skits, and she was talking about how she went to her gynecologist, and she told her gynecologist that her periods were heavy, and her gynecologist said, "As long as you're not passing clots the size of a dinner plate, you're fine."
It's so commonplace. Come on.
What? It's wild. Anyways, so she was having heavy periods that nobody asked her about, but she kept presenting to her PCP with fatigue. So fatigued, really struggling to get through her day, really struggling. She had labs. They found her to be anemic. They didn't do anything about it. No further testing. This just dragged on over the course of a couple of months. And it came to the point where she was in a critical situation. So her body swelled up, her legs swelled up. She was short of breath and she couldn't really walk. She was so short of breath. So she went to the ER and she was critically anemic. And the reason that that's a problem is because anemia is a low red blood cell count in your blood, right? And our red blood cells carry oxygen. That's their job. So if our red blood cell level drops, our oxygen carrying capacity drops. And we cannot function without oxygen
Yeah.
to our body, right? To our
Yeah.
muscles and all of our
Yeah.
tissues. So she had clearly dipped below a threshold of what was body sustaining in what her own bloodstream was able to support in terms of oxygen
Mm.
transportation from the lungs to the rest of her body. Ended up in the hospital, was diagnosed with heart failure. Nobody really talked about why she had heart failure, but she had heart failure. So, they did all the cardiac things. They threw the book at her, put her on all the drugs, did the stress test, whatever. And her herself started to then like Google and chat GPT her symptoms and thought maybe it's because I'm anemic. So she asked her PCP to check her ferritin level, and it was like 2. And really, if you talk to a lot of trichologists, the hematologists, ferritin level needs to, in a woman that's menstruating, needs to be at least 60. I say it needs to be 100. So, I mean, she had no iron left in her body. And as a result of that, she went into heart failure and nearly died. And the whole thing could be traced back to nobody actually asked her, are your periods heavy? Which they were because she was in perimenopause. She had to sort of heal herself. So she managed to find out that she had low ferritin, and she was started on iron infusions. And then she came to see me because her other perimenopausal symptoms were not controlled. And we fixed those problems, and she feels like $1 million now. But
Great.
that's what happens when you gaslight women and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, this is just your age. Well, you're
Yeah.
just stressed. It's because you're an empty nester. Your kids are, graduating high school. You're going through a divorce. You have older parents. Women are
Yeah.
gaslit all the time.
Yeah.
Everything else is to blame. But maybe there's without acknowledging that there's this huge hormonal thing that's the shift that's happening in their body.
Crazy. I don't know if it was you or somebody else said, some doctors will just say use 2 sanitary towels.
Yeah, that's what they told her. When she talked to her gynecologist about her heavy periods, they told her to use 2 tampons.
Are you kidding me?
Can you
Like,
imagine even putting in 2 tampons? I don't
no.
even know how I would do that.
One would get lost and then it's a whole nother issue. I mean, that is so yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is, and it's not the first time, there are these crazy stories where we're being gaslit constantly. And what it does is it makes you feel inferior. It makes you feel really stupid. I remember, it's so funny, I've actually only just remembered now. Many, many years ago, I had a doctor phone me and he shouted for 5 minutes on the phone because I questioned a medication that he kept giving me for constant UTIs. It was an antibiotic, the same one, the same one, the same one, and suddenly it changed. And I feel I have the right to know why it's different. Back then, I had no idea that you could become, what is the word if you
Resistant.
resistant? Yeah. And so maybe that was his methodology. Like this chick's got like 9 UTIs. By the way, there was no further like discussion around it, but he shouted that I felt like he said, he was basically saying, I am the doctor, you are the patient, you've never studied, and do not question my authority. I cried. It was awful. And it's funny, I actually mentally blocked it out. I think I forgot about it. But yeah, these stories go on. And if you're listening and you feel like you've been gaslit, I just want you to know, Dr. Noor is here, I'm here, we all see this, and it does happen, and it doesn't have to be that way. So I'm very excited that hopefully that cog is turning, things are starting to change a bit. Yeah, I want to dive into something that is also very exciting because there is hope, women out there, about libido. One of the biggest problems is low libido, and it's like, suddenly, in your 30s, things were great, and like a light switch,
It's
it's
gone.
off. It's gone. And it's not because, oh, I think it must be me. It's my fault. Like, you know what? Maybe it's my partner. Let's talk about this. What is the protocol? What do you say to a patient that comes in and they're crying and they're upset?
Patients this week, one of them, she came in and she sat down and she started to cry. And I always ask people, what can I do for you? And she started to cry and she said, my husband left me. Haven't had sex in 4 years. And I didn't realize this was normal. And I felt so ashamed that I didn't tell anybody. So she had no libido and she had really, really painful sex. So she stopped having sex 4 years ago, which led ultimately to the breakdown of her marriage. And she was devastated, but more devastated that she didn't know that this happens. and that this is normal. And I always tell people, and they're like, I have no libido. I'm like, yeah, you and everybody else. Most women that come into my office, they say to me, if I don't have sex for the rest of my life, it's fine. I don't care. That's how I feel. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's how I felt too. I hear you. So when a woman comes in with low libido, there's two arms to this. The first one is the libido question. The second arm is vaginal, right? You're not going to want to have sex if it hurts to have sex and it feels like shards of glass. So we definitely need to address that. So we take a very kind of vaginal vulva approach, make sure that we get that all feeling better and not painful and not dry, so that you can have sex without pain. That's one of the things we do. Libido is a mood, right? Libido is not something that you can turn on overnight. It's a mood. It's biopsychosocial. There's biological impacts. There's psychological parts of it. There's relationship parts of it. If you don't want to have sex with your husband and you actually hate your husband, or you don't want to be with him anymore, you're not going to want to have sex with him, right? And that's a whole other conversation that probably has nothing to do with your hormones. So when I see a patient and her main symptom is low libido, we figure out her vaginal symptoms, make sure that we get that all under control. Then I figure out, do you want to have sex? Number one. Or do you want to have sex? Do you want to have sex with your husband? Right. That's another question. Because I've had people say, I want to have sex, but not with my husband.
Yeah.
I want to have
Right.
sex with Joe Schmo down the road or whatever. Right. So that's important to figure out. Where are we? Who do we want to have sex with? So we know we have a goal set, some goal setting. Initially, for a lot of women, it's their perimenopause and menopause. It's their hormones. So I initially start with the basics. If you approve a woman's estradiol, people love to talk about testosterone, and we do talk about testosterone, but I personally feel that estradiol is a great hormone for libido. So first, we restore some estradiol and some progesterone, depending on what the situation is, and then we see how that feels. It takes a while for libido to come back. It's not like we turn off your hot flashes or your sleep gets better within a couple of weeks. It's a slower sort of burn. I tell people, don't expect, that overnight you're going to want to have sex. So I'll start there, and then I'll see what impact that has. I will often, if we're not getting the result that we want, and maybe for other reasons like brain fog, or they're osteoporotic, or they're sarcopenic, which means low muscle mass, I will bring in the testosterone as well. So I'll do estradiol and testosterone. We'll see how that goes, give that a couple of months. And then there are two non-hormonal options for low libido on the market for women. One is called Addyi. Addyi is a medication that you take every night. It actually was originally under investigation as an antidepressant, and then it was found to have this benefit of increasing libido. So it was kind of repurposed and FDA approved for Hypoactive Desire Disorder, which is fancy for low libido in women. It's a medication you have to take every day. So it's not something that you would take on an as-needed basis. You take it on a daily basis every night at bedtime. And they generally say it takes 2 to 3 months to see benefit. I do have a couple of patients on Addyi that really like it and have definitely felt improvement in their libido. So that's one non-hormonal option.
And it's safe to take.
Safe to take.
For sure.
One side effect that it's associated with it is a little bit of dizziness after dosing, which is why we have people take it at bedtime. Second non-hormonal option is a medication called Vyleesi. Vyleesi is an injected medication, and it is an as-needed medication. So kind of how a man might take Viagra. So you would use it maybe an hour before you want to have intercourse. I have a couple of patients that do use that and do derive benefit from that. So we have options. So we initially start with the basics. What's going on with your vulva and vagina? Let's make sure we get that fixed so that you're not in pain. And then let's fix your hormones. Not just for your libido, but for everything else, right? For your bone health and for your brain health and your cardiovascular risk and any other symptoms you might have. That's estradiol. Then we think about testosterone. And if we're still not getting what we want, then we kind of pivot and bring in some of the non-hormonal options as well.
Oh, I'm sure you know about this. Another doctor I was speaking to recently is promoting Scream Cream.
Scream Cream. So Scream Cream is topical sildenafil. So it's Viagra. So the thing about these drugs, the thing about these drugs, they're called phosphodiesterase inhibitors. So the Viagra and the Cialis, so the sildenafil, tadalafil, very, very interesting drugs. They're considered longevity drugs. Basically, phosphodiesterase inhibitor means that they cause vasodilation, dilation of the blood vessels. It brings your blood pressure down. And there was a study done in 2024 on the UK Biobank. So the UK Biobank is a big biobank with about 500,000 people's information, and they're tracked year on year. So they do labs and blood pressure and, any medication that they're taking, new diagnoses, and you can mine that data and pull things out. So this group mined the data, and they looked at the 400 most commonly prescribed drugs in the NHS, and then pulled from that the 9 drugs associated with a longer life and the 9 drugs associated with a shorter life. And the ones with the shorter life kind of are as expected. They're things like diuretics for heart failure, things like opiates. The ones that are associated with longer life, sildenafil is one of them, which is Viagra.
Wow.
Additionally, there were 4 estrogen products on that list at the top.
Surprise, surprise.
So Viagra, there are longevity docs out there that would say Viagra for everybody. We should all be taking low dose, phosphodiesterase inhibitors because it decreases
Yeah.
the risk of cardiovascular disease. There's some really interesting data out there.
Amazing.
On a local level, when a man takes Viagra, it causes vasodilation, which is how the penis works. How the penis becomes erect is because it fills with blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the penis becomes erect. Our clitoris is basically the same tissue. It's the glands of the penis, but developed in a different way. So Scream Cream is topical sildenafil, so not taking it orally, but applying it to the clitoris to cause a little bit of clitoral engorgement that can help with orgasm, can help with sensation, and just make the whole thing a little bit better.
Exciting. Good conversation. People are going to be like Googling. You'll see. It's so wonderful. Let's talk about the DEXA scan. And I love it. You're so passionate about it. You have this at your practice. We want to hear more about your practice as well. So if you want to talk about that as well, absolutely. But I want to hear about this. I have never had a bone density scan. I turned 50 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. And my doctor's like, we wait till you're 50. Maybe it's a Canada thing where you wait till you're 50 to have it done. I think mostly because it's covered by our medical insurance, OHIP, over here. But let's talk about this. Excited.
So I have a DEXA scanner. So when I first opened Lifestyles, it was just me, in a tiny, tiny room by myself. And I wanted to have a bone density option, but it was a very expensive option. So I got just a small body composition scale that you would stand on, and I paid a lot of money for it, really, in terms of what my budget was. And I was not impressed with it. I didn't think that it was very consistent with results. I kept getting on in it over and over again, and it was giving me different results. I just was not impressed with this piece of equipment. And this is a high-end piece of equipment. And I was like, no, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to get the DEXA scanner. So I called GE. I remember my mother was there, and I was like, I'm just going to get this. And she's like, are you sure? Hey, what are you doing? Are you sure? I was like, I'm just going to get it. So I called GE and I said, I want a DEXA scanner because I want to be able to do bone density and I want to do gold standard body composition, which is what a DEXA scanner does. So it was an expensive endeavor. They helped me figure out a way for me to get this, and they shoehorned it in a tiny space of my practice because
Is it a big thing?
It's big, yeah. You have to land it. It's a big piece of equipment. And I remember when the sales guy came and looked at our space, and I was like, I know it's small. Do you think it'll fit? And he's like, I've put DEXA scanners in closets. Don't you worry. We'll figure it out. It was great. So the DEXA scanner does 2 things globally. It does bone and body composition. Again, in bone, it's divided into 2 things. Conventionally covered by insurance, people get a bone density scan, which basically means how dark it looks on the x-ray, how mineralized the bone is, right? So compare, like, if you were x-raying, a chocolate fudge cake versus an angel food cake, right? Angel food cake, you can see through it a little bit, but a chocolate fudge cake, you can't. It's more dense. Same idea. So they're looking at our bones, and it's telling us how dense our bones are. So when you get something covered by insurance, they're going to do bone density of your lumbar spine and your left hip. That's it. And they're going to compare you to somebody younger than you and tell you how much better or worse your bone density is than somebody significantly younger than you. Useful information. However, I think we have 206 bones in our body, and I think that there's more information out there. So we do your lumbar spine, both of your hips, and your non-dominant forearm. And I do the forearm because women break their forearms routinely. Often I'll say, okay, your bone density is not too bad in your lumbar spine and your bilateral hips, but actually you're osteoporotic in your forearm. And that's a very important thing to know. And if you don't look, you won't know. So we do the bone density of 4 locations, and then we have an additional test called the TBS, or trabecular bone score. TBS is a measure of the tensile strength of the bone. I mean, density is really, it's not a perfect test because it's just going to tell you how dense your tissue, your bones are. It's not going to tell us how strong your bones are. So TBS is a measure of the microarchitecture of your lumbar spine. So it's a piece of additional software that's going to look in and kind of give us an idea of how degraded the architecture is. And then we can extrapolate from that how strong the bone is. So it's a useful test because sometimes I'll see bone density that's high and then the TBS is low. And sometimes I'll see the opposite. So that's an additional kind of data point that's really important. So that's bone density. Body analysis or body composition, it's going to look at how much visceral fat we have. So how much fat is inside the abdomen, how much muscle we have, how much fat we have, and we can break out the muscle over each of your limbs. And it can give us an idea of one of the problems with BMI, which is conventionally what we use, right? Body mass index, is that body mass index is not very useful and accurate when you want to talk about somebody's cardiovascular risk. What we really need to know is how much muscle you have and how much fat you have in relation to each other. So you can have something we call skinny fat, right? We can have somebody that weighs 130 pounds, but then has 6 pounds of fat in their abdomen and almost no muscle. And that person has as much of a risk of cardiovascular disease as somebody that weighs 350 pounds.
Yeah. Super useful. I would love to have one of those. What do you do? Then you've got somebody who is osteoporotic and she's maybe 55. It's like, I suppose you can take other steps over and above HRT, which then you would do, right?
100%. And first thing, we need to know. If you don't know, you can't take action, right? There's plenty of women cruising around and the first time they know that they have osteoporosis is when they have a fracture.
Yeah.
And that's just not good enough. And that's the majority of women. The first sign that they have osteoporosis is actually a fracture. So what we're trying to do is preempt that. So yes, having a conversation around lifestyle, weightlifting, jumping, adequate nutrition, vitamin D, adequate protein, living as much of a kind of anti-inflammatory lifestyle as you can.
Yes.
And then, hormones are a big conversation. And then there are drugs out there that sometimes I'll use in conjunction with hormones that are what we call bone building drugs. And they're, more and more are coming on the market and they have utility in this group of women.
Tell us about your practice. What is happening there now? You've got your DEXA scan. You are there. It looks, when I look at your website and everything and your link tree, there's just so much going on there. There's skincare. There's a whole lot of stuff.
So Lifestyles by Noor I like to describe it as a midlife wellness destination. What we offer memberships and packages. It's not one-off care. I tried to do that at the beginning and it just didn't work. It was very disjointed. So what we offer is a partnership. I have a dietitian on staff. I have a mind-body therapist. So if somebody comes to see me for an initial assessment and wants to join our practice, everything is included. The other issue that I had initially was I was ordering labs and then people were getting these huge bills, $3,000, $4,000 bills. So I said, I don't need to do that. I can negotiate the lab costs and I can lump that in. And then people aren't getting these unexpected bills, which is something I can't stand. So basically you join at some level, depending on what level of input that you want. Your labs are included, your DEXA scans are included. We have a gynecology PA who does the kind of gyne side, and we partner in your health. So we do HRT, but we also do everything else. I manage people's cholesterol and their diabetes and their bone health and their, whatever it is we need to do to help you be the best person that you can be. That's what we're going to work on.
It sounds like the Fairmont Hotel boutique practice. And I wish I lived close to you. Anybody if you can have Dr. Noor on your front door, I'm telling you, amazing. Thank you so much for today. I really appreciate your time. We're recording on a Saturday, and I will quickly share with you guys how wonderful this woman is. We already did a podcast, but guess who forgot to click record, moi. And so she is so gracious and wonderful. All my yogis know we do squat pose, and I told them a whole story just to waste time to keep them in squat pose longer. And they all went like this when I told them that guess who didn't press record. So thank you for being so wonderful. I'm going to drop all of Dr. Noor's details into the YouTube description, onto Spotify, into the show notes. It's been a great morning. Thank you so much. It's been necessary. It's been powerful. And I think I love going back to the basics and making it really clear for everybody. Guys, we need to advocate for ourselves, right? Seek out this crucial information. Read, glean, listen to podcasts, but also listen to your body. Thank you for your amazing Instagram page. So much education. Get onto Dr. Noor's Instagram page. Frankly, we all need a Dr. Noor. So for everyone who listened today and had an aha moment about maybe the breast cancer stigma, whatever it is, the WHI trials, or the amazing benefits of Scream Cream or progesterone, whatever it was for you, it's going to be in the show notes, so you will get it. You can contact Dr. Noor at, I think it's Ask Dr. Noor on Instagram.
Yeah.
Ask Dr. Noor.
Yeah.
And go check out Lifestyles by Noor. It has been wonderful. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.